Moving on to France, what we see is, by contrast, monarchical authority, really the opposite of the Dutch Republic. And this monarchical authority was on the rise, culminating under Louis XIV, who wanted to direct French culture and use art to further state goals. Not uncommon. We see a lot of that, frequently in the form of propaganda. One of the great artists of the period is going to be Nicolas Poussin. As was the case for many French artists, Poussin would study in Rome, and he was ultimately responsible for the trend towards classical subjects in French painting. His classical style is in striking contrast to the Italian Baroque style, and we're going to see that in Arcadia Ego. Now, this work draws on the classical order of Raphael and antique statuary. He's looking at Raphael in terms of color, and we see that use of bright color, as well as a vivid landscape in the background, although the landscape, of course, has been darkened to fit better with the 17th century understanding of color and painting. Landscape here is used in detail for the setting rather than as a background. In the foreground, we have three shepherds in the idyllic land of Arcadia, this sort of land from the golden age of man, as it were, this land before man falls. And what we're seeing is they're studying a tomb. In the process, we have this woman coming up and placing her hand on one of their shoulders. She may be the spirit of death. Now remember, in the 17th century, women are seen as lesser than men, so the idea of creating arguably evil creature in a feminine form makes a lot of sense to them. This may also be the introduction of sin into the world in non-religious terms. After all, this is a very pastoral setting. We have none of the pomp and circumstance you would expect from a painting like this if it were happening, for example, in Baroque Italy. The compact group, even lighting, and thoughtful, reserved manner complement his classical figure types. So he's looking at classical statuary, at the work of Raphael and others. He's taking basically the Italian Renaissance and updating it, adding what they know of color there. And you can see that, for example, in the modulation of light in the trees, or the modulation of light in the clouds. These are far more realistic than anything we would see in Renaissance Italy. He's very careful with his use of atmospheric perspective, giving us a sense of distance and the mountains in the background. The figures in the foreground are pushing the ideas of Michelangelo with the muscularity, but they're also fairly plain and relatable, an idea he's taking from Caravaggio. The female figure, interestingly, is fully dressed, very, very modest compared to the men. And this is reflecting their ideas of gender and their ideas of women in general in the 17th century in France. They don't want to be too forthright in their imagery.